for joining the ESBC podcast network. And we are a three-dimensional podcast. Like Joseph Campbell says, we hit the three levels. Not only do we teach you the financial markets, the betting markets, so you can pick the right game, we also deal with the major issues that you should know about, that we have a responsibility to educate you about. Because it doesn't matter if you're a sports podcast, you have to know the basics. And then it's always better to be lucky than good. And man, do we have great fortune to have Sara Lynn Robinson, lead actress from Hollywood. She's so intelligent, so articulate. To give her insight, and what we're doing is we're giving people insight that they normally do not get. So on this podcast, you're going to get information you cannot get anywhere else. Thank you for joining us, Sara.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk politics today, something I know a little bit more about than basketball. So it's a nice, reprieve from that.
Yeah, but we're teaching you basketball, so watch out.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
And both times we've done the basketball, we haven't gotten any games wrong.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's been great. I've always liked it as a fan, but I'm enjoying it more now that I have, skin in the game.
Yes, and you're making money. We could say 100% we're making money. And I asked you that I was going to place a wager on who Joe Biden was going to pick as vice president, and you nailed that, and we made money doing that. So thank you. You're 100. Everybody on the podcast is 100% making me money. In one way or another. First report for 4 years with sports. Now you with Kamala Harris, and then Brianna Winter with baseball. She's making. So very fortunate. Feel very fortunate, lucky, and good to have, because you're the measure of the five people around you, and I'm so happy and ecstatic that I have you guys around me, as we're all going through such a difficult time. Now, before we were talking about what we're going to do on this podcast is educate you on what's going on, number one. And then number two, when you place a wager on these elections, because we are in the middle of a pandemic, if you can make some money off these elections, why not?
Right.
You and I were discussing a very interesting statistic earlier.
Yes, about election betting. I did not know this, but betting markets are the best predictors of who is going to win. They have been 100% accurate since Roosevelt in predicting who is going to win the presidential election.
Isn't that amazing? So
it is.
What happens is that in any election, there's 40% for you, and there's 40% against you, and then there's that middle. Right? That middle wants to know if you're on top. In real life, they're the ones looking out the window at work to see what car you drive when you come in. They're the ones to see if you're in shape, what clothes you have, are you keeping up with the Joneses? That's what they want to know. All right? In an election, people pick sides and they get emotional about it. And like we talked on the other podcast, when you're in the emotional part of your brain, it's on purpose. Politicians know exactly what emotional buttons to push. Build that wall. The other side is, they're putting babies in cages, right? They get in the emotional side of each side's head. And when you're in the emotional amygdala brain, you really can't make decisions. You make reptilian decisions. However, people that bet, right? People that put money on things, they think from the rational side of their head. They look at the different factors, they look at the numbers, and they focus on who is going to win, right? And that's why the betting markets have always been more accurate. Now, we'll first talk, we'll go macro to micro. We'll first talk about different ways we're being gaslighted and lied to. And one way is polls, these fake polls. And you were sharing what you do when you get one of these questionnaires from from Trump.
Yes. So I have a lot of experience with fake polls. I'm getting, I would say probably one a day, multiple emails a day, definitely, but also probably a poll a day from Trump's official website. And some of the things that I've seen are just truly appalling. It doesn't feel like politics anymore. It feels like someone running for student body president and, you know, calling another girl a slut. It's
Right.
really, really wild. Some of the nicknames that he's attributed to both Biden and Harris. Phony Kamala Harris is his new one. I think because he was too afraid to go for the race card or the woman card, which I guess I should be thankful for that. He's also called Joe Biden Sleepy Joe, Phony Joe, China Joe. That was interesting. Slow Joe. Yeah, there's a oh, this was a good one. I did this one yesterday. MS-13 loving Joe Biden. That's completely baseless and groundless. I have no idea where that came from. MS-13, if anyone doesn't know, is one of the most dangerous gangs in the world, right. Terrorizing Central America currently. Yeah, so it has been really interesting. I want to insert my own opinion here and say that I have never seen that on the other side. You know, this is coming from our incumbent Republican president, and I've never seen slander like this on the other side.
I've seen it on both sides through many years, and it's always for a reason, right? It's always for social proof. And I would like your thoughts on the Democratic National Convention, and it's specifically Joe Biden's speech.
Mm-hmm.
It's bipartisan, right? And it's crazy, right? Because journalism, you're supposed to be neutral. You're not supposed to pick one side. You don't pick another, and you try to be as pragmatic as possible and
sure.
keep things close to the vest. But both Fox News and CNN and NBC both agreed that Biden exceeded expectations. And what he did was he took away the whole bully thing by bringing in the 13-year-old kid with a stuttering problem like he does.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was a really beautiful, teachable moment. And also, you know, clearly I just got one as we were talking at the beginning of this, another Trump poll, and he's going right back to, you know, Slow Joe and these same claims that he's been leveling against Joe Biden. So that he clearly has learned nothing, but I thought it was a really beautiful, teachable moment for the other side, that there was really no Trump slander. There was nothing that wasn't true. The only thing that Democrats were saying at the DNC was that, you know, I love that they referred to him not as President Trump, but as the current occupant. So the current occupant of the White House, right, can be doing this better, should be doing this better. But none of them were saying anything that wasn't true. And I thought it was really beautiful and inspirational, going back to what Michelle Obama preached, which is when they go low, we go high. And I thought it was a really classy event. And I was saying this to you earlier too. I love that there were some moments of levity. I wrote these down because they made me laugh. Amy Klobuchar was saying that he shouldn't want to abolish the USPS because he's going to have to send them a change of address form come January. I thought that was really funny. And then, yeah, it was great burn from Amy. And Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Andrew Yang were mispronouncing Mike Pence's name like he has done with Kamala Harris. Obviously, he knows how to pronounce it, and he's just doing it to undercut her, which again feels very juvenile. But yes, overall, I was really impressed. I think Obama's speech, Joe Biden's speech, and Kamala's speech were all really beautiful and inspirational, and didn't feel like they were going for defamation. It just felt like they were going for hope.
And what we'll do too is our homework next week is we're going to watch the Republican National Convention, and then give them equal time. What is going on, right?
Yeah.
one thing that always happens, and it's happening now with Kanye West, is the whole concept, and I want to know your opinion on it, and it's the whole concept of stalking horse. And what a stalking horse is an individual who's just in the race to obstruct another individual from winning. They're not trying to win, all right? So in this case, Jared Kushner and everybody else is paying for Kanye West to be in the race to take votes away from Joe Biden. And what we're going to do on this podcast, we're going to introduce a lot of concepts that you're not getting in the news that we've seen for years. So I'd like to know your thoughts on that. What do you feel about that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I obviously knew the tactic. I had never heard the term stalking horse until today. So I thought that's really interesting. It's absolutely true. I don't see why there's any reason, even, Kanye West, as unstable as he can be, and I hope he's, getting the help and the resources that he needs, but as unstable as he can be, I truly don't think that he believes that he is fit to be president. Right. So I see no other reason why he's running, if only to divert attention and votes from Joe Biden. And yeah, it's really frustrating because I've also heard a lot of people, I'll be completely honest, though he has my vote. Joe Biden was not my first pick in the primaries, but we have a very broken two-party system. So I think if you are voting third party, if you're voting for Kanye West, our stalking horse this year, your vote's going to go to Trump. It's going to go to the incumbent and not to ousting the incumbent. I really don't see it any other way. But I said this to you earlier too. I mean, if gerrymandering is still legal, then I'm not surprised that this is as well.
Right. And we get to, and I'm going to ask you this question because this has always bothered me. And that's one of the great things. You always have to be, you're the average of the 5 people around you. And one of the things I treasure about having Sara Lynn Robinson in my life is how intelligent she is, how she can help me with something I've been grappling around for years. And I've seen both sides of it, and I'd like to know your take on it, all right? Because it's always been said that the rich get justice, or no, the rich get off, and the poor get justice, right? The golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules, right? And we see this with Roger Stone committing multiple felonies and get it off, so on and so forth. So, and this happens in local politics. And a lot of what we're saying, the biggest impact you can have is in local politics, okay? Now, what are your feelings on the letter of the law, right? Selective prosecution. So what selective prosecution says is that the sheriff or whoever the law enforcement is has too many crimes to deal with, so they should have the discretion on which crimes to prosecute and which crimes shouldn't, all right? And I'm going to add, because you can handle it, another level of complexity to it. I'd love to know your thoughts. You have that, right? But you also have political side, the hypocrisy side, right? Trump with the Bible, right? And he looked like he had never held the line, right? We all know that the people that say that they're the biggest Christians are usually the biggest scumbag, drug dealer,
Can be, yes. Trump is certainly not a Christian.
Right? So you add that layer to it, right? And you add that layer of hypocrisy to it. And then another part of it is, and that's the 3-part, the third part is that, in my opinion, we have to hold local politicians and national politicians accountable to not talk in broad generalities, but talk in specifics, right? And pay attention to ethical issues, because there's a lot of things that are unethical, like the stalking horse, but it's not illegal,
Right.
and hold
Yeah.
the fire. I'd like to know your thoughts on that. How do you feel about those three items that I mentioned?
Yeah, it's interesting. Okay, you threw a lot at me. I'm gonna try to catch everything.
Right.
But yeah, one thing with selective prosecution, one thing that stuck out to me. Yeah, I definitely think, and Obama actually even mentioned this very beautifully and eloquently
Right.
in his speech on the last night. He said, "No one American can change the future of this country, not even the president."
Right.
As you said, President Trump has had loads of support from his minions within his own family, who I sometimes don't even think believe what he's preaching, but they're following along for the power and the money, which is what I think it all comes down to.
Right.
To Roger Stone, Steve Bannon, and Paul Manafort, all of whom have been indicted on crimes and will probably get off on those crimes. So yeah, I do think you're right in that it starts at home. I think it starts locally. And you can reach a much broader audience and make a much bigger impact nearby. If I were to march up to Washington and start my, one woman protest, I'm probably not going to get very far. And, I may be thrown in some sort of like Putin backed, new neo-Nazi jail. But if I run for local election, I could actually start to affect some change within my own community, and maybe even again, maybe not on a national level. I don't have the power yet to take down Kanye West, but maybe I could eliminate a stalking horse in a local election, or eliminate gerrymandering of a local election.
Right. So in your mind, that's gerrymander. Now, in your mind, how should selective prosecution, should it even exist? How would you deal with it? What's the right way to deal with it, in your opinion?
To be honest, I don't know that I have an answer for that. Not being a politician, this is all just conjecture and opinion based. So, yeah, I would love to know your thoughts, but I don't know that I have.
I'll tell you my thoughts. Yeah, and let me
Okay.
know what you think. Right. I think the way you deal with it. Number one, the public should end with this all apathy, and like we're into sports, we're into entertainment, we're into these other things, but we pay attention to politics because we have to, right? You got a pandemic, you got all these people making decisions for you. Like my town that I live in, they had $45 million, and they refuse to use the $45 million for any PPEs, and you have nurses protesting because they won't use 40 because they want to do it for the corruption and the racketeering they're doing. So what I suggest is and we had it on the podcast with Stephen Albright, wrote 23 books. He's a consultant, and he made a great point, and I shocked me because he's to the right, but he made a great point about citizen review boards and review boards that police the city. So for selective prosecution should be handled by a citizens board that, number one, has no financial ties to anybody in the police department or the city council or Congress or whoever. Bring in a diverse, right? We know that diverse companies make 35% more free cash flow than anything else, and women CEOs make 45% more cash flows than men CEOs. So the way you handle selective prosecution is having Sara, Lynn Robinson on a board who's independent, who's not getting paid off by anybody, to decide the issues of selective prosecution if they arise. My opinion is you're going to see less of it once the sheriff and these people know that they can't just prosecute people that are being paid off to prosecute.
Right. Yes, I completely agree.
Yeah. So we've educated the public on the fake polls. We gave them what's important about the Democratic convention, right? We talked about the stalking horse, selective prosecution, right? And now we lead to the point of, and I love your insight on that, how the media gaslights us about these polls that show national polls when in fact battleground states are what is important.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's hard, you know, and I live in a very, we live in a very blue state. And I've spent a lot of time in very blue states. So it is hard, you know. Hillary actually got criticized for not coming to enough blue versus red states and really pandering to the battleground states. You know, our 6 battleground states being, I want to make sure I get this correct: Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida, Arizona, Wisconsin, and Michigan.
Right.
But I think, you know, the win is in those states. If Hillary had clinched those states, she got the popular vote, she would have gotten the electoral college with, I think, even one of those battleground states.
Right.
So yeah, I think it really will come down to those, both in, you know, local elections and our presidential election. So it's complicated.
It is complicated. It is complicated. We'll take a look at it. And I like going to Real Clear Politics. They give a good cross section of what's going on in each state. And what we'll do is we'll give you a breakdown right now after the Democratic convention, because they really do a good job of bringing people from around the country. And you can see the results of their internal polling from the messaging that they're getting across. And that's the way Sara and I will listen to the Republican convention, seeing what their internal polling says and what they have to do to win the Republicans. And we'll give you insight next week. So
right.
Now,
I want to jump in. I want to jump in for 1 second, just because I found this really funny. I'm very biased, but I really loved the DNC's lineup. You know, you had all of these incredible and influential and eloquent speakers. So the RNC, so far we have the couple that aimed guns at Black Lives Matter protesters. We have the student from a Catholic school who smugly wore a MAGA hat in front of a Native American man. We of course have Trump. It's such a laughable lineup. I actually thought, I'm forgetting where I saw this release, but I actually thought I was reading an Onion article at first. That really killed me. But yes, sorry, I kind of got away from your point, but you were talking about, you know, media bias and being gaslit by media. You know, as much as I do associate myself as a Democrat and a liberal, I really do try to look at all sources, even sources that I know are skewed right, like Breitbart. You know, if someone is having an argument or you know, on Facebook or via text or, you know, what have you, or stumbles across an article, I'll read it, because I would rather be informed than, you know, ignorant, even if the article in question makes me want to light myself on fire, which many of them do. But I think, yeah, it's really important. You know, I get kind of a liberal skewed newsletter in my inbox every day. Actually, I get 2 of them. I get the CNN and then I get Betches. Their article, which is for, you know, for young Democrat women. But I also love Real Clear Politics, and I love NPR. And this is a resource that I think doesn't get enough accolades. Snopes.com, I really love. They really do their research, and about very specific things. You know, not just conspiracy theories like, you know, birtherism around Obama or Harris. But it'll be little things like, I saw someone, again, on a Facebook post, someone in my family put a comment on a Facebook post saying like, well, you know, I'm voting for Trump because he creates jobs. Unemployment, and this is pre-pandemic, unemployment was actually worse, or has been worse under Trump than it was under Obama. And Snopes confirms that. So they really do their research. So I would just beg of everyone, regardless of what side you're on, to really do your research. Run it by, you know, a few different sources, especially ones that are really center, before you post on Facebook and go spouting off about how it's true. Because a lot, and we've seen this with the not to keep coming back to the pandemic, but we've seen this with the pandemic. There's been a lot of misinformation surrounding that. And a quick Google search will tell you that none of that is true.
And that's what's important, right? We've gone to the time, and I had a great professor, Robert Andriga, and he was an independently wealthy guy. And the reason he was teaching school was because he was bored at home, smart guy. And the first part of the class, he would give one side of an argument.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say the liberal side. And then the next side, he would give the Republican side.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the class, the homework was you decide which answer it was, and you were always baffled because he was
Mm-hmm.
so brilliant at being able to argue both sides. And he says you have to know both sides of the argument, like Sara's doing, right? To be an intelligent individual. In philosophy, it says a life unexamined is not worth living. So if you're not examining and learning from people who think different from you, you're missing part of the richness of life. So you have to know both sides. So that's what we do on this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure you don't get somewhere else. Information we research, but Sara and I, we'll tell you flat out, we don't have a monopoly on the truth. We're not going to tell you what you should think, right? We want
Mm-hmm.
you to do your own research.
Right.
And when you do your own research, you can start prognosticating things and winning things. And as far as our research is concerned, we're looking at these battleground states.
Mm-hmm.
And 95% of people died within 30 miles of where they were born. And Sara and I have traveled around the country. We've met different people. We've engaged different people. We listen to them. So I think we have, and especially Sara has, particular insight in what can happen and who are these people in Wisconsin, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Sara mentioned Hillary Clinton's, the reason she lost, she won the popular vote, but the reason she lost, right? And we always talk about it's better to be lucky than good. People who say, oh, I know this 100%, it's impossible. In probability theory, the most you can know something is 80%. And Hillary got sick, and she couldn't go to Michigan or Wisconsin. And Obama tried to come in the end, but she ended up losing as the Trump campaign was more focused. And the betting market saw this, right, and predicted accurately that Trump would win. And we'll get to what's going on later. But we'll go macro, and then we'll go to the specific states, and we'll ask Sara what she feels. But Wisconsin was won by Trump by 1%.
Mm-hmm.
Now the polls are showing Biden up by 4.2%. And what's interesting about Real Clear Politics is that it's a composite of the polls. You have polls that, like, let's say Quinnipiac, that always shows the Republican winning by 10 points. Then you have another polls that come out that always show the Democrat winning by 10 points. Why? That's for social proof, and that's to gaslight the people in the middle to think that their side is on top. Right? So they use a composite, and the composite poll shows Biden up by 6.5%. And then Wisconsin, I think you were discussing Michigan. They're both similar states as to, let's say, Madison would be more liberal, and then where the school is, and then all the farmlands. I'll keep it real, right? All the farmlands has a bunch of hicks. Trump guys.
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that.
The same thing in Michigan, right? Is that inaccurate, or let me know your experience with the folks from Wisconsin?
Sure. I'm not going to say hicks. I would definitely say that, and actually I was going to say the same thing about Pennsylvania,
Right.
Being a working class Rust Belt state, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Rust Belt, and I said this to you earlier. So I was born and raised in Michigan, a more liberal part of Michigan, but I saw, I saw both. We had, friends and family members who lost jobs due to the automobile industry crash and who were very on the right side because they thought that Democrats were, taxing too high and taking away jobs. And I think that it's the same thing in Pennsylvania. These people are truly putting all of their eggs in Trump's basket. I wouldn't say that makes them hicks. And same thing with, farm country. In Colorado, I know a lot of, which is where I went to high school. I know a lot of, gun-toting, proud Republican farmers in Colorado. And it's the same thing. I think it all comes down to, FDA and USDA and farmers' rights and job creation. And I think it's the same thing for Wisconsin farm country. And you'll see this, in any part of the country, the cities and the places where young people congregate, college towns, are always going to be a little bit more liberal. So where I was born, which is a shitty, very poor part of, I shouldn't say shitty, I love it, and I don't want to make anyone feel bad. But it was a very poor part of Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti. But Ann Arbor was a very liberal community. Detroit's a pretty liberal community. Madison, Milwaukee, pretty liberal communities. But when you go outside, you're going to find more of the red vote. Wisconsin, though, I will say, I think especially because of proximity to Chicago and Chicago's blue influence, I am going to say that they're going to go Biden for this election. I know it's kind of early to make a prediction, but that would be my guess.
Right. And I was, again, lucky that I was invited to a NAFTA conference with President Trudeau of Canada. And what they said about these people, and I want to know your thoughts. What they said with the Canadian government. And I didn't get to talk to Trudeau, but I talked to a nice gentleman from the consulate in LA. And what he said was that Trump took advantage of those folks you're talking about being disenfranchised, and then used the Mexican population as a scapegoat, as to say, oh, you don't have your jobs and things have gone down in manufacturing because of these people.
Right.
Is that correct from what you know about them?
I would absolutely say yes. I think that Trump employs nothing but fear-mongering tactics. And that goes back to what I was saying about his internal polls that are completely biased. He's the one spouting off about fake news when he's getting and giving his information from polls that he only sends his supporters. I only signed up for his, internal email list that's supposed to be just for, his fans and supporters, so that I could kind of keep tabs on what he was doing and what he was saying. And of course I was appalled, about these accusations that he's leveling against Kamala Harris. This is really interesting, and I learned this on Snopes.com this week. Trump actually donated to Kamala Harris's Attorney General campaign just a few years ago. So I thought that was really interesting. And so the people on the right that are popping off about hypocrisy on the left, there's obviously hypocrisy on both sides. But I think that they, like you said, they have hit this, maybe like a third of the American population have hitched their horse to Trump's wagon, and they refuse to give in. And I think the more they're met with facts, the more they're going to dig their heels in. So yes, I absolutely think that that's true. And I think that he panders and he is a fearmonger, and a lot of these people are same reason why a lot of people don't like wearing masks. I think people get off on being a contrarian and thinking that they know better than the top politicians, and they love Trump because he's not a politician, when in reality that just means he doesn't know what he's doing. And we're not listening to our top scientists and doctors and epidemiologists regarding the pandemic because, Susanna, my 60-year-old high school teacher, did a quick Google search and decided that, vaccines cause autism, and that wearing a mask is going to give her carbon dioxide poisoning. So Trump is, I don't want to talk down to anyone who is a Trump supporter, but I think that Trump is preying on people like that.
Absolutely. And we'll give the Republican side, and I'll make sure both Sarah and I will do so because we're multi-dimensional.
Right. I'm actually more excited, Josh, for the Republican National Committee than I was for the Democratic National Committee. I am pumped to see what they come up with.
Right. It's going to be very interesting. And I'm
Yeah.
very interested to see what our breakdown is going to be. I'm going to pull up now, make it clear. It's going to be a good baseline for the next couple of podcasts we're going to do. These are the top 6 states. There are actually 10. And we'll go through to educate the public as it pops up here. The 10 states that are battlegrounds, and then all of the states that are definitely going one way or another, right? And the only ones that we're going to look at are going to be those 10 states. And then very important and this is another part, and I want to know your thoughts on this too, because this is very important. And it just came to me, but it's been a pet peeve of mine for a while that's, angered me. And it's the fact that people don't understand that we do not live in a pure democracy. We live in a representative democracy, and that's a very important distinction to know. And my thoughts is that we should not, on both sides. This is, and it's funny because Ronald Reagan talked about this, and it's on both sides. If you go too far to the right, you're fascist. If you go too far to the left, you're communist.
Right.
So any extreme is bad. And the way we were gaslighted and lied to when we were going to school, we were taught about democracy. So you're like, oh, you get to vote and you get to decide. You have a role in this. As you get older and you go to a corporation and, and I hate to use this crude term, but it explains what happens in corporations. The person who talks the most at a corporation is the first one to get fired, right? The quack that quacks the loudest is the first one to get shot, right? You notice people lying to get elected and doing something different. Because once they're elected, you lose their power because they're now representing you, right? And from both sides, both Republicans and Democrats argue how our rights are being taken away. So what my opinion is and it's one of the things I want to educate people on the podcast from my side, but I'd like to know what your thoughts are. We need to fight for democracy to have a say as much as possible. And we shouldn't give our interest away either to people to the left, right, that maybe want government too big, and then people to the right that want corporations to control things from a fascist level. Right.
Yeah, I totally agree. And actually going back to what you said about Canada, I was fortunate enough to be there the night that Trudeau was elected, back when I was 24. Yeah, it was an incredible experience to be there. And I was so amazed, I'm ashamed to say I didn't know much about Canadian politics at the time. And I was so amazed keeping, tabs on the polls and seeing that they had 4 very viable parties. And I think that's one of as much as I would call myself, a progressive Democrat, I'm pretty, far on the left side. I think we need more, the people in the middle need more representation.
Right.
Because something I've also seen a lot thrown around, especially since Kamala Harris was appointed VP, is that they're progressive leftist socialists, and they're trying to force us into, as you said, a communist dictatorship. And which again, I think is crazy for someone who is best friends with Vladimir Putin, but whatever.
Right.
That blows my mind. But I think that a lot of people in the center are feeling their voices and their votes are being kind of lost in the shuffle and taken away because it's just far left versus far right. And I do think we need more representation for people like that. And then, maybe someone like my dad, who thinks of himself as a true Republican, but also isn't a Trump supporter, isn't forced to commit to party over person and, basically close his eyes and plug his nose and vote for Trump. So I think I would love to see more representation for people who who are more toward the middle. I think that would be really important for us as a democracy.
Right, and to be educated on, because on the local level, they say, okay, city councilman retires. Should we appoint someone or have an election? I think people need to stand up, even though city council guys might be their friends, and say, hey, we need an election because we're supposed to be a democracy, and freedom is not free. We need to fight for pure democracy on every level. As much as possible.
Yeah.
That's
Absolutely.
And now something that's interesting with your dad. How do you feel about that in society where I know we share this too? There were 4 years out of my life. My dad's 84 now, and we get along now. But for 5 years we didn't talk.
Wow.
Politics and religion. That's why they say never talk about politics, right? And we didn't talk, for a long time. And I haven't talked to my sister for 20 years over religion.
Okay.
And, you shared with me, right? That you got Tea Party people, and I've gotten it from both sides, but I get along with both sides. But Tea Party people and far left people who I have a business partner, and she's like, Josh, if that person is not a Democrat, I'm not doing business with them. Don't bring me at all or nothing at all.
Yeah.
And that always kind of, even though I kind of agree, I struggle with it, right? Because it didn't feel right when you said that, right? Because you can disagree with somebody, but everybody has a right to earn a living, and business should be always kind of neutral. The other side is that I was very naive, right, and ill-informed with the whole George Floyd thing. And I was naive and ill-informed at how racist and evil people are, and people that are just at a drop of the hat willing to question the credibility of Sara and Josh just because Sara's a woman and Josh is a minority at a drop of the hat. And it could be that guy that I'm referring to my friend. Her name is Lauren. How do you make sense of all that?
Yeah, that's really difficult. And I don't think we've ever seen, since 2016, I don't think we've ever seen division run this deeply, and to be kind of trapped in two parties that are so polarizing.
Right.
That it has to be Hillary or Trump. It has to be Biden or Trump. Because, as I was saying about opening up more parties and maybe having a Green Party on the ticket, or having, a Bernie who is farther left, and then a Biden who, as much as the Republicans like to spout off about what a progressive he is, he's really more center left. Right. So yeah, I think it's been really hard to watch my friends and family navigate this, and I'm navigating it myself. It definitely has really driven a divide between the people in my life who I used to kind of casually refer to as a little more conservative, or, she's Republican, but we just don't talk politics. It's made that a lot more apparent and feels more life or death, because it literally is. And that's just my stance. I'm sure there are some Trump supporters that would argue that. But when I'm voting in November, I'm going to be voting for my rights as a woman, for my friends who are LGBTQIA, my friends who are, immigrants, or who are minorities, or who are Black, when Trump won't acknowledge the Black Lives Matter movement, or the corruption that is running so deep within our police forces. So yeah, it's really complicated. And as much as I want to say that I am open to other points of view, because as I said, I do try to really diversify what I'm reading and the information I'm taking in. This time has made it a lot more difficult to do that. And you know, I mentioned my dad. It's been, if I can, you know, be completely honest, it's been really hard on our relationship, and it has definitely driven a wedge between us. And we'll see how November goes. But we've been kind of back and forth since, I guess since Kamala was nominated. And I was very excited about that. And he is just really digging his heels in. And yeah, as much as I want to say, I have different views and I can still love you, I think what I always say is politics end where human rights begin. I don't think this is, it's not a political discussion anymore. Trump is forcing children back into school when we know some of them are going to get sick and die. And we have Betsy DeVos, who's never attended public school in her life, pushing for that because she wants the economy to restart, and fully knowing that we could lose 1% of our children. Yeah, I mean, he's actually losing people's lives at this point. So it just no longer feels like it's politics or a difference in opinion. As I said earlier, it feels like we are fighting for our lives and the lives of others, those who are disenfranchised. I was fortunate enough to be born in this country, and I love this country, but you know, God forbid I were born into a country that does have an MS-13 presence, unlike Joe Biden. As Trump claimed, and they're trying to seek asylum, which is not illegal, and then they're dying or getting molested in a children's detention center at the border. That to me just feels unconscionable, and there's no amount of tax break that would make that palatable to me. Right. So I'm sorry, that was a long-winded answer, but basically all of that to say, yes, it's definitely driven a wedge between me and the more conservative people in my life. You know, chief of all among them, my dad. And I see where Lauren is coming from, because to say that you're voting for, I won't say Republican, because I understand, you know, we need to be open to other viewpoints. And I do think that the far left can be just as intolerant as the far right. But people who are not only Republicans, but still aligning themselves with Trump after everything he's said and done, that is completely baffling to me, and something that would make me not want to have a relationship with you, be it business wise or in a personal capacity.
No, very well said, and that's what makes this podcast so valuable, is that we're keeping it real, and we're describing what the voters are going to, right? As we place a wager, right, on who we think is going to win, and we understand our surroundings, we understand ourselves and the people around us. Now, before we go to showing the whole map and then the senatorial races, I wanted your thoughts on this, because you follow, I believe, Kellyanne Conway's niece, or
her daughter, her 15-year-old daughter, Claudia Conway, who is a personal hero of mine.
All right, yeah, and then you have George Conway, her husband. They're part of the Lincoln Project. And a very interesting tweet they had was because Michelle Obama says that when they go low, we go high. And she stood with that, even though Trump has been winning by going low.
Right.
Now, political campaigns that I've been involved in, or political candidates that I give guidance to, I always go to the statistics, right? 95% of candidates that go negative win the race.
Wow.
So, the polling's wrong about it, because people, for whatever reason, don't say what they really feel. They answer the way they think people should think they answer. They don't want to say, oh, yeah, that guy's negative, so he makes me feel safe. It's the whole thing sometimes. My wife's the expert. I don't know anything about this. But the correlation, they say, is battered women. The guy that's battering makes them feel safe, right? Because they're going to beat up other people. So that's how they feel about candidates like that. And that's the allure of a guy who blusters like Trump, right? And they win elections. So the Lincoln Project, George Conway says, well, we'll go low for you.
Right.
The Republicans that are going on. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's by all means necessary, whatever you got to do to win? If they go low, we go lower so we can get the win.
Right. Again, under normal circumstances, which nothing has been normal this year, right. I think I would say, no, it's not necessary. And I would love for someone to set an example about how they can clinch a victory without saying, without talking about how Melania is an immigrant, or how Trump has 5 kids from 3 different wives, or, right. bringing up these things from his past and really looking at his failures as a leader, all of which he has. He has as many personal failures as he does professional and political. But it would be really refreshing to see someone go high. And that's what I was saying. I really loved that there really was no Trump bashing. No. I would love to hear if someone has another opinion, but there really was no Trump bashing at the DNC. It was just very fair. And as I said, just really filled with hope. That's what I was left with. But I also think that it's really important that the Democrats take this election. So I guess, I don't want to say that all's fair in love and war, or all's fair in, politics, but I think at this point, Trump has kind of drawn the line. And he continues to go low and low and lower and, show us how he's going to fight. So I guess I would say, outside of doing something truly abominable, I would say whatever Joe and Kamala need to do to win, I think is understandable.
Yeah, and I always go back to Shoe Dog, a book written by Phil Knight. And it's been my experience in life that you always, for me anyways, because I was raised the right way, or maybe not raised the right way, I don't know. It's just the way I was raised, that you try to do things the right way the first time, right? But you got to survive, And we've both met people that very talented, had things going their way, and they didn't survive because life is unfair, very uncertain. So I always try to do it the right way the first time, and if that doesn't work, sometimes you have to go the wrong way because you got to get the win. You got to get the win. So let's look at this, because again, people are in denial and they get gaslighted about this. So California, Oregon, Washington, right? They're going to go, and let me know if you disagree.
No, I would agree with all of those for sure.
Democrat, Nevada, and Arizona has had a lot of California transplants. And people are so stuck in their head, in their bubble, that they thought that there were going to be a lot more similarities between Nevada and California and Arizona than there were. Now they're stuck in these god-awful hot places.
Right.
And they end up making this blue states. Utah, conservative Mormon, right? Conservative Mormon. Same thing for Idaho. Montana. Montana's interesting because they're libertarian mostly, right? You got the Freeman who shot FBI. If I shot an FBI agent, I would be in jail for a very long time. These Freemen shot FBI agents and they were acquitted. Wyoming, very red, rural state. Colorado. I'll let you handle Colorado because you're the Colorado expert. And New Mexico are similar states. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. What's that?
They sometimes go either way. They can go Republican or
Yeah, they can be both of them. I've seen go both ways, and they can err on the side of swing states. But I'm going to say confidently, both will go blue for sure. And Colorado, I think, especially since we legalized marijuana, we've had this huge influx of just really open-minded, kind of free, progressive thinkers. So I can't see it going any other way. And I grew up in a small, actually conservative suburb of Denver. So that's always interesting to see how that goes. There are definitely some, and it's also, a little bit of a farming community. My high school was right next to a farm. We would get cows like jump into the parking lot sometimes. So as I was saying, you know, the kind of gun-toting conservative population is definitely there. But Denver itself, especially in recent years, is super, super liberal. So I can't see either of those states going any other way. And New Mexico, you know, Santa Fe, Albuquerque, both pretty liberal, but they've also really struggled. You know, the whole Breaking Bad is based in New Mexico. So they've really struggled with the opioid epidemic. So I really think that it would behoove them to vote in someone who's going to put that at the forefront of their policies and their fights.
Right. And early in my career, I'm different now, but and thank you for we're getting comments. So feel free to ask Sara or myself any questions you like. Gentlemen out there saying, you know, that the polls are off like last time. We're going to break that down for you, right? Because again, you have polls that are to the far right, polls that are to the far left. Mm-hmm. We're going to try to figure out, not try, I hate the word try. My clients don't use it anymore, so I'm going to try. But back earlier in my career, now I will not take a client, and I'm fortunate I'm lucky and good enough, and it's a luxury. I feel very humbled to say this, but I will not take a client. No, you're very welcome. I will not take a client who isn't in alignment with my values. Mm-hmm. That's, you know, the way I am. But again, like the lawyer in Dringa, you always think of both sides, right? Mm-hmm. And people would hire me to win, right? To beat the competition, to make them money. So, looking at this, and let me know your thoughts. The best way for Trump to win this election, right? You mentioned Colorado, is the fact that Joe Biden is not for the national legalization of cannabis. Now, he is for medicinal uses, but not recreational uses. Mm-hmm. In Colorado, both Republican senators, while being conservative, were for the national legalization of cannabis because they had to do that to win. So if Trump comes out and says, you know, I have a big change of heart, and I'm going to instruct William Barr not to prosecute cannabis related crimes, and I am now for the national legalization of cannabis. Now, taking your partisan hat off and your feelings, like, do you feel like as a strategist, that's his best path to victory?
Well, I can't see him ever doing that, but if he did, I think it would definitely swing some votes his way. You know, we all vote with our own consciences. So I think that if that is the hill that you're willing to die on, and that is what matters most to you, and you're kind of putting all of your stock in that, then I guess I could see that swinging some votes his ways. But I would hope that, especially Colorado, because as I said, it is overall a pretty, you know, liberal state. I would hope that even though Joe isn't necessarily the marijuana candidate, that was probably Sanders, I would hope that they have enough of a conscience and knowledge of what he's going to do in other fields, in other arenas, to still vote Biden.
Right.
But I think that's a really interesting thought. I had not thought about that happening. Again, I don't think it will, and I hope it doesn't. But I could definitely see him doing something strategic like that, maybe at the last minute, if polls are not showing in his favor.
Absolutely, absolutely. And looking at it from a strategy standpoint, and looking at it from a betting angle, that's where the value is for him. Now you go to North and South Dakota, really red states.
Yeah.
Now, those states, Democrats can win, but what they do is they call them blue dogs. You act and talk like a Republican, but just register as a Democrat. That's how those women win those states. Then you have Texas. Texas is changing. It's evolving. Again, with a lot of California people that want to lower their income taxes, they go to Texas and deal with the heat. I can't deal with the heat anymore. But Texas, for the
It's
most part,
brutal.
was Democratic. Beto had a chance against Ted Cruz.
Yeah, it was close. I really had hope for for Beto.
I like him.
That was tough. I do too. I think he's a good guy. And it always made me, watching his speeches always made me laugh because he would start out looking normal and at the end would look like he had been doused in lighter fluid. He gets so sweatier than I've ever seen anyone get. Just made me, on a completely not political note, that just made me really happy.
Now, when it's the off season, after football season, I want to do a podcast, and I think Sara would join me. I want to do one on Louisiana politics, the history of it until today, because it's still very relevant. It's the only state to have a senator and a governor elected from jail. And Huey Long said it first, and then Eddie Edwards said it. There's actually a reality show with Eddie Edwards on it. And then it said the phrase of both myself and my opponent steal. Out of $3, my opponent will take 3. I'm going to take 2, and you know I'm going to take 2. You know who I am. You don't know who he is. So vote for a crook you know versus the crook you don't know.
Yeah.
In Louisiana, it's the same way. When I lived in New Orleans, they were like, son, if you need anything from me, let me know. And you knew not to get anything from him. All those very, very extreme corruption. And literally those can go either way. They split it between the Democrats and the Republicans, equally corrupt. So always a wild card. Arkansas, home bill in Hillary Clinton, has gone to the right. And that governor is what it flipped around. He was supposed to be so great. Mr. Herd Immunity. And that's another thing. People have lied about what herd immunity is. We got to do a COVID-19 one. COVID-19, what they told us in the beginning and what ends up happening. In the beginning of COVID-19, they made a big thing about herd immunity. Herd immunity is 50% of the population. So out of 4 million people, 200 million people have to get infected for you to have herd immunity. So the governor of Arkansas, as they say, talked about herd immunity. He was a big star. Now he's the big goat. He's literally gotten people killed. We're waiting for because they updated it ongoing. When they get a poll, they update it. And we're going through Arkansas, Louisiana, and up into the Midwest. And what are your thoughts on Indiana?
Indiana's tough. I could see it going either way because it's Mike Pence's home state. So I think there's probably a lot of hometown pride and support for him. But I also was in Indianapolis shortly after the election, and it was really beautiful to see. They had signs outside of various places, but especially places that gay bars or places that were LGBTQ friendly that say hate has no home here, you're welcome here, you're loved here. So again, it's probably the big cities that will swing it one way or another. Indianapolis is pretty blue, pretty open-minded. So I could see that going either way. I guess if I had to guess, I think that's going to go for Biden because of Mike Pence. I think that may wind up working against him.
Well, this is something interesting too, right? I'd like to know your thoughts. Predicting the election. The stimulus package would help Trump, right? And
absolutely.
That goes into Indiana, Kentucky, right? That are very, very poor but conservative states. And how do you make sense of this? Because you mentioned too, right? That Trump had been married 4 times. He's cheated in every business deal he's ever been in, right? But yet, the far-right Christians love him. I'm like, all right, what Bible are you reading? But these poor people, right, are still very, very, very conservative, but they're the ones getting hit hard by not having a stimulus. And part of it is because the Republicans feel they're going to lose anyways. So how do you think that's going to play out?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Again, as I said, I think he is a fearmonger, and he purports to be anti-government, and his whole slogan was "Drain the swamp," when he's just bringing swamp monsters into his home. I think if anything, he's doing the opposite. I think, though, for a lot, he's definitely not a Christian. And I thought this was interesting in the last election. The day that it came out, I read Hillary's book, What Happened? And she talks
Right.
a lot about her faith. And I'm not a religious person, but Hillary is, and she is really truly identifies herself as a Christian, and everything that embodies. And she talks about how important prayer is to her, and how she does these daily devotionals every morning and every evening. And the Clintons are truly a Christian family. And Trump, yeah, again, this is so pandering. He had that photo of him where he cleared out protesters and tear gas protesters so he could take a picture with a church, and then he held the Bible upside down. It's just, I will never understand why people are deifying this man who is clearly not Christian, clearly not a politician, and clearly not a fit leader. But I think to your point about how conservative Christians and a lot of people who are trapped in poverty continue to follow him. I think that's because of his lofty promises, and I think they truly believe him because he is not a politician, and because he makes them these promises, and they think that he's going to deliver on, like bringing all of our manufacturing back to the States, when everyone knows that we could never afford that. Apple's never going to set up a plant in the States because it would cost too much to make iPads. That's just, it is what it is. And the top 1% is always going to benefit from cheap labor in other countries. And Trump knows that as much as anybody else. And And the second point, I think a lot of it goes back to abortion. I've seen a lot just, online or talking to people with different viewpoints. For a lot of people, I think that it comes down to that. And if you are a single issue voter and abortion is what you see as our nation's biggest problem, you're going to go with Trump. Now, I would guess that with his track record with women, I could almost guarantee that he's paid for some women to have abortions. That's probably a very controversial opinion, but I can't imagine that not being in his past.
Yeah, you can have your own opinion, right? But you can't have your own facts. And it's factual evidence that he has paid for abortions. The women have brought out the canceled checks. There's been corroboration with doormen and different situations where he has paid for a lot of abortions. But of course, the out is that he's a new man in Christ. He's
right.
Born. All right.
He's born again. Right. Yeah. But that doesn't erase, his 3 wives and his cheating allegations, and the video with Billy Bush, and his rape and sexual assault allegations. But again, I think if abortion is your biggest concern, you're going to go with someone who, and he won't, but he says that he's going to get rid of it. And I think just like with the job creation, if someone's telling you that and that's all you really care about, you're going to believe it. Versus Joe Biden, who is, open about his desire to, to keep what we have now, which is bodily autonomy for women and, safe access to abortions. And I also want to throw in, and then I'll get off my soapbox, but I want to throw in that
this is a podcast, you can talk as long as you want.
Okay, thank you. But I just want to throw out there that, making abortions illegal and taking away safe access to them will never end abortions. You're just going to see more maternal death, because women are going to have to pay exorbitant amounts of money to get unsafe abortions and will probably die as a result.
Right. No, and it goes back to what we're trying to eliminate on the podcast. And Sara's the admin on all our social media. So this kind of gets the wheels turning that we have to do our own reporting, right? And because people are getting slanted information, right? And we know how to cite sources. We know how to decipher what's legitimate evidence and what isn't. And we look forward to keep on reporting that to you. And that's the beauty of a podcast versus a radio show. You can talk as long as you want to get the full version of what you want to communicate without somebody interrupting you and not getting the full picture. And we can go in detail to the map of the United States and show you how the election will break down so you can monetize it, right? Minnesota, very libertarian state, not necessarily liberal, but libertarian. It's been swinging to the left lately. Iowa can go either way. We'll finish the podcast looking at different races. There's going to be a very, very interesting race, close race with Joni Ernst in Iowa. Missouri. I can't think of Missouri without thinking about the Netflix series.
The Ozark. Yeah.
And then the economists did a study on 115 countries trying to figure out which countries were corrupt and which countries were not corrupt. The study ended up saying that all 115 countries had some level of corruption. And when you start going down from, go to Arkansas, very, very poor, right? A lot of payouts with politicians. Louisiana, we talked about that, how corrupt. It's a culture of corruption there, Louisiana, where Eddie Edwards wins an election from jail as a convicted felon. You go to Mississippi, Biloxi, Mississippi, very, very corrupt state. Tennessee is progressive. Nashville is moving up. So even though they're conservative 100% of the time, they're evolving. Very nice place. Alabama. I was driving from Florida all the way to California. We stood in Alabama. My wife started screaming at me in the car. She's like, you can't believe we went to the gas station. They had slave action figures. That's all you need to know about Alabama. But things have gotten so bad for the Republican Party that they're in a tight race with Doug Jones, right? He's a Dixiecrat. You act and you walk like a Republican and just register as a Democrat. So that's a very interesting one against Tommy Tuberville, an ex-football coach, who's a Trump guy. You go down to a place that I lived for 20 god-awful years of my life, the state of Florida. And there's not it's very corrupt, very bought and paid for. I worked for a guy by the name of Santo Traficante. His dad was accused of killing Kennedy. He was a mobster. 5 families, the Bonanno family. When I owned my restaurant, I got a catering job at a horse farm in Ocala owned by John Gotti.
Wow.
If you look at the history of it, and I encourage everybody to read this book, and I guess Kaylee Turr wanted Pence to read The People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. And he talks about how the South was basically constructed with criminals in mind, right? Because you just left with Florida is inhospitable without air conditioning, so you just put all the criminals in Florida. and it's still like that. So Georgia, you go to Georgia where Stacey Abrams got cheated out of an election, right?
Yeah.
Or if you go into South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, North Carolina, where they had a disputed election. So these states are very corrupt. And then you go to Kentucky and West Virginia, and that's that dynamic we were talking about with Indiana. And I guess they're clustered together of being really, really poor, but being very conservative at the same time. Joe Manchin won a race there. Again, Dixiecrat, act and talk like a Republican, just register as a Democrat. And then you have Al Capone. You have Illinois and Chicago, which when you lived in Chicago, it was Mayor Daley, the Chicago
Yeah.
They went re-election.
Yeah, that was rough. And I was there. I was actually there for the whole Rod Blagojevich scandal too. So that was crazy. But then I also got to be there for 2 Obama election nights, which was truly a magical experience I will never forget for the rest of my life.
And I was struck when Obama won. And again, it was false. I hate to say it, right? Keep hope alive. But it was false hope. I thought that this country had maybe moved a step forward. And at that point, 2009, I was very hardcore in being neutral. So I was watching the Obama inauguration, and it was weird the way it hit me. I got a little emotional.
Mm.
But studying Obama, to no fault of his own, he's a brilliant man. He goes into working for the union. He flips over a factory where everybody talks Spanish and got them unionized, right? That's his claim to fame. And then what I love about Obama, and it's a great lesson in business and life, is that he knows how to build relationships. And people are so loyal to him. You look at Justice Roberts, who was in law school with him in Harvard Law. Loyal to Obama. He made such an impression on him that he saved the Affordable Care Act for Obama.
Mm-hmm.
Was that his classmate who he respected, right? Because Obama, I hate when they say stuff either about Richard Nixon, his intellect, even though he got in trouble, and when they question Obama's intellect, he's a law scholar, congressional
Mm-hmm.
law, on the level
Mm-hmm.
of Justice Roberts, that he respects him so much that he saved him with the Affordable Care Act. But at the same time, to survive, he became an alderman out of the Chicago machine, and then rode all those union dollars to the presidency. So that's Illinois, man. That's tough. Mm-hmm. Now, Ohio and Michigan. No president has been elected, either Republican or Democrat, without winning the state of Ohio. Mm-hmm. It's a very neutral state. These guys have it in black. And you have that dynamic, right? Even though I think Columbus, even though it's the home of the university, is still conservative. Very middle of the road.
Yeah.
Michigan, and what are your thoughts on Michigan? And you give us some real detail, because you were talking a lot about Ann Arbor.
Yeah. I think that Michigan is going to go blue for this election. It's tough. Michigan is a really tough area, again, because as I said, they were hit, maybe harder than anyone in the recession, and things have been declining there since the 90s. And Flint is still dealing with not having drinkable water, which is a direct result of political corruption, because their water source became tainted. So I think that there's, as much as it is a state that would benefit from Trump's lofty job promises, I think that they're going to go blue because of Flint and Ann Arbor and Detroit. That would be my guess. Ohio, I honestly don't know. But Michigan, I'm gonna say is riding with Biden.
Yeah, no, being part of and I say that, and I've had great mentors, and I've had access to billionaires, as I say this, but I like learning from people, right? Because you don't have access to excellent people, and both Rob Portman and Sherrod Brown. Rob Portman's a Republican, and Sherrod Brown's a Democrat. They know how to play that middle road there. Mm-hmm. They know they have to do that to be elected, and I think both of them are very excellent. You don't know people, right? Sometimes you'll live with somebody, you don't know them. But their public persona, right? Everybody has a public impression. Their public persona is very excellent, very eloquent, and they get things done. Very impressed with those two guys. It'll be very close. Michigan, theoretically, right? And it was funny. Those votes were funny. But in theory, Trump won Michigan by 12,000 votes. Very, very, very slim margin.
Yeah.
Governor of Michigan, she's very interesting. They thought that maybe she was going to be a vice presidential candidate. She got in trouble with some corruption with her husband in a boat. And you go to Pennsylvania, very interesting state, because Joe Biden was born there. So they think he has an edge, and he fits. I remember when Biden ran against Obama, the commercial he had was him, shooting out guns in the yard. He's like, I want to use that. So that's going to be a very, very interesting, and it's going to be the same dynamic you talked about, right? The rural areas versus Philadelphia.
Right. That'll be interesting because I always think about hometown advantage, but then Elizabeth Warren, Massachusetts senator, was third place in her home state.
Right. No,
so I don't know.
And I lived 2 years in Boston, and the dynamics in Boston were fascinating to me.
Mm-hmm.
I had a really good time, and I made a lot of friends in Boston. And Boston is, very, very liberal city, state, but it was more racist than the South when I lived in the South. There's a lot of racism, institutional racism in Boston. And then there's
absolutely
elitism in Boston. Are you legacy, non-legacy? If you're non-legacy, no. But I had some legacy friends who would take me to an underground dungeon, and everybody in there was, legacy, and you were cool, and you had a great time because you don't bring an idiot to those places. So I was able to be friends with both sides, and that culture fascinated me. But I could see Elizabeth Warren losing out of pure, it sounds like an oxymoron, but pure liberal misogyny from the Northeast.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's what it was.
Cuomo land, another place I had a really good time in. And then when you go to this part right here, I remember living in Boston, they call them massholes, right? The people who live in farmland. Then you have New Hampshire, Maine. The first time I went up there, and it was crazy, right? Because I was young, and I was stupid, and I was arrogant, and I had a friend who delivered high-end art to Rhode Island. So we would go a straight shot, 16 hours to Rhode Island, and I'd be happy-go-lucky carrying $40 million worth of art. Then I would touch it, and then my whole body would get into sweat, right? Because I was subjugating all my fear and anxiety. Man, if I drop this, literally I'm dead. And the crazy part about it is he used to deliver the art, and all he would get was a bag full of money and a slip he would give them, this little tiny slip he would give people. I'm like, man, with so much money and so much going on, this is how this deal goes down.
Right.
It's because of taxes, right?
Yeah.
Art, you can depreciate the value and get it off your taxes, tax mitigation. But that's what those areas are about, and that's why the Trump tax cut resonates with them. And, we'll go to the senatorial races, and we won't predict them. We'll define them, and we'll predict them on the third podcast, which will be a week before the election. Next week, we'll do a recap on the Republicans, and let me get real clear politics, and we'll go through the races real quick. We'll see what you think, and then we'll have final thoughts. And thank you so much. It's been a fascinating podcast, I think.
Yeah, a lot of interesting conversations happening here.
Right, and those topics that we broached, have you seen anybody talk about them? I haven't.
Not on any podcast that I have listened to, no. And definitely not within the betting sphere.
No, and I haven't heard Wall Street Journal talk about it. I haven't seen it on CNBC, CNN. Nobody has broached these topics that are vital, really, I think. And I think you and I bring interesting perspectives because we have not just lived in Orange County our whole lives. We've traveled around the country, and we're open to meeting and learning from new people, which unfortunately is becoming a lost skill. So I'm just waiting it to pop up. We'll look at 10 senatorial races, because the other part of it is nothing can get to Congress unless one party has the three branches, which I think is dangerous. I think you always have to have diversity of thought. You always have to have a process. However, things have gotten so messed up with polarization that if you have a split, nothing gets done. One side tries to obstruct the other without doing what they're supposed to do and what they lie to us when they're running for office, saying, hey, let's do what my wife tells her clients. you do what's best for yourself and for the people around you.
Mm-hmm.
And they run saying they're going to do that, but then they get in office and all they do is follow the money. They do what whoever pays them to do. And that's something that I always want to make clear to people. And especially on the third podcast, we'll discuss. Sarah and I'll screenshot campaign contributions. Because again, they spew it to themselves. You don't know. And now with mail-in ballots, there's going to be a lot of mail-in ballots before politicians disclose where they're getting their money from.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's something that people need to learn to research.
Mm-hmm.
Freedom is not free. And if you don't know where the money's coming from, you're doing a disservice to yourself and to the community, right? Because people talk about draining the swamp, but they don't do it, right? Lobbyists are out of control, money's out of control.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll show you where the money is coming from and how to do your own research about where the money's coming from. And one thing I'd like to ask you is China. What are your thoughts on China and how it's going to affect the presidential election?
Yeah, I think, again, Trump with his fear-mongering tactics, I think he's kind of using China as the boogeyman when a lot of people don't even really know what potential threat it poses. But that has been really interesting. And another thing that's been really infuriating about the pandemic, the election following so closely on the pandemic's heels, I think that there was already so much fear surrounding China and Russia, and these societies that run differently than ours and that are not democracies. So I think Trump is kind of using that, as you said, as a scapegoat, and blaming the whole pandemic on China because it originated in China, which is, I don't know if you saw that interview with the Australian reporter and Trump, but he kept referring to it as the Chinese virus or the China virus. And he knows exactly what he's doing. If something originated here, I don't think anyone would ever call it the American virus, because that's our privilege that we live in, a wealthy superpower and a democracy and a first world country. But because it's China and people are already so scared of China and misinformed about China, it's really easy to point fingers and to blame China for this entire pandemic and for the death of 170,000 plus people just in our country alone. So yeah, that'll be really interesting. I'm sure that'll come up in the debates. And as I said, Trump is now calling Joe Biden China Joe. I have no idea why. But yeah, I don't know. That's another really complicated subject.
Yeah, it's very complicated because it has many layers to it. And I think the China, and that's something we can work on to educate the public on, that the problem with China is on the local level. Mm-hmm. The Chinese Communist Party basically run a Ponzi scheme with people, and they take the money to pay off local politicians so they can rig real estate. And one of the most rigged real estate places because of China and local combination of China's money, right, and local politicians being so unpatriotic and the public being so apathetic, right, that it's been a field day for Chinese and real estate interest. Not the only reason, but one of the reasons real estate is so inflated in Southern California is because of that. Now, you have to do your own reporting. You have to do your own research. So with Trump, I'll give him credit. He did in late January And it's funny, he does this in late January, but he doesn't tell people not to go to the Super Bowl. And it's funny how many people got sick at the Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point in time, they weren't attributing it to COVID-19 when Trump had information that it was COVID-19. But he does the China travel ban. No, it wasn't a travel ban. There were 12 loopholes he allowed. So Trump has been one of the most lenient presidents towards China that we've had in a very long time. He praises dictators and he praised
right.
who's also a dictator. And I think he would admit, or he is admitting at this point, that that was a mistake, right? He in a debate, if Biden says, "Why did you praise Xi?" I think his advisors and everybody else will say, "Hey, that was a mistake I made. This is the China virus," he wants to say. But
right.
That's why you have to do your own reporting, and you can't. It goes back to what our parents taught us. Believe nothing of what you hear and half of what you see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's very smart. Yeah.
Let's define these Senate races real quick.
Okay.
Texas, Cronin's probably going to win. All right. North Carolina can go either way. You got Tom Tillis, the incumbent. Currently, these are composite polls, right? Like the gentleman in the chat. Anybody in the chat wants to keep asking questions, we're happy to have you here. And please ask as many questions as you want. These are composite polls. So it's taking the polar opposites and going to a return from the mean. And remember, we use return from the mean in sports betting as well. So there you have Tom Tillis in North Carolina. And this one shows a few of them. Michigan, the Democrats winning by 3. This is where the Republicans have a huge concern, right? When Trump started surging in the polls in 2016, my first instinct was, man, this is going to be the death of the Republican Party. But it took a while, but this is huge. Arizona's a right to carry state. You can carry a gun in your holster. Very conservative. And the Democrat, Kelly, has a substantial lead in the polls against McSally. And remember, McSally, she was very, very nasty to reporters during the impeachment. Strong Republican. And the problem with this right now is that big, deep-pocketed Republicans like Alderson and, who owns the Sands, they don't want to invest money in a loser. So there's a double whammy for McSally that she hasn't been able to rig it to make her look like she's even close. This gets them up by 11, right? Another one that has the Republicans worried. Pompeo was supposed to leave the White House and go to Kansas. We're not going to predict this one because this one, I really feel things are rigged in Kansas and the Republicans are going to win. However, the fact that it's only showing a 2-point lead, it's pretty bad news for Trump. All right. Another one to look at is Georgia. Georgia has 2 of them. One is the billionaire lady who got caught insider trading, right? That sounds like greed to me, right? You already have $1 billion. You're still insider trading, right?
Right.
These were the senators who got briefed on COVID-19 and immediately left the building and called their brokers to sell stock, which we all know is illegal. You cannot, as a government official, trade stock when you have insider information. Now, I'll give a plug to the betting podcast. Those laws don't apply to sports betting. Sports betting is an easier market to figure out. And yesterday, I had an interview with the head coach of Houston Baptist football. And we talked some hardcore football. He taught me a lot. So technically, if this was stock, I couldn't bet on a game because I have insider information. But sports betting, very, very legal. That's why that podcast, and Sara and I are on the NBA one. Remember, we had an NBA coach come on the podcast. and give us insider information. That's why we make you a lot of money, and that's what gives us an edge, makes the podcast so valuable. But I digress. She couldn't do that. She couldn't take the information she got from the intelligence or from Dr. Burt's and Fauci and then go sell stock. But you have Purdue from Purdue's Chicken against Ossoff. And if you remember him, he's a very young guy who was in a Republican district by 30 points and almost won a congressional race. He won it, or came close to winning through social media. He was outspent 30-1.
Right.
So, yeah, when we recall the guy in Lake Forest, we were outspent 20-1. So, but you can win. That's why you never judge a book by its cover. So he's going to lose. It'll be a shame if Laughlin wins, but we're going to take a look at it. And then another couple races I want to look at for the Senate. All right, it's going to be. Let's see. Bring up the Senate polls. I want to bring up Iowa. Here we go. Go Iowa. And Trump is winning Iowa by a few percentage points. What's going to be interesting to me, and something we'll be able to bet on late, is going to be that Iowa Senate race. Let's see. So we've got under top Senate races. It pops up here. All right. So I'd like to know your thoughts, because one of the things I found out when I owned my restaurant was that I'm really I like people watching and I'm into sociology. So it's very, very interesting to me, the tightrope Joni Ernst walked in defending Trump, even though obviously he got people killed right in the Ukraine, trying to shake him down for intel on Biden, and how she did what the other guys, the Democrats, do, right? They walk and talk like Republicans, but register as Democrats. She did the opposite. She talked like Adam Schiff, but at the end of the day voted not to impeach him. How is she going to survive the Senate race? Theresa Greenfield. And let me look at her background. There's one lady in a race like this, and she's a Democrat, who was the next CIA agent.
Oh.
Yeah. So yeah, that's her. She's an ex CIA agent, and she's running against Ernst, a military woman. So again, you're talking about military woman, ex-CIA agent, and she's walking and talking like a Republican, registered as a Democrat, to be able to win that race. And man, they're tied up, and it's really interesting.
Yeah, that's really close
to see their strategists and them go after each other. So that's a race we're watching for Senate. That's going to be very interesting. You can put money on it, and it'll be interesting to see. And we'll give you that prediction a week before the election, which really isn't, because the mail-in ballots, a lot of ballots that come in. So those are your top Senate races. The other one I wanted to talk about, we'll close with this one. I'd like to know your thoughts on this lady, Susan Collins. Again, a similar case to Iowa, and they ran Sara Gideon. And let's look at her bio real quick. Very interesting. That poll is very interesting. All right. She is up in the polls because Susan Collins, again, voted for the Trump impeachment, and she was very, very disingenuous and nasty. So by the fact that she was disingenuous and nasty, she talked like Adam Schiff, but at the end of the day caved, right? And that's why a lot of people, are impressed with Mitt Romney, who voted against it, right? He stuck through to her principles. She didn't. And heck, if there's some money out there, definitely put some money on Sara Gideon, who got millions and millions of money in campaign contributions to go against Susan Collins, who's always waffled, and that's a very independent Maine state. And I wonder if the people in Maine, right, are tired of being lied to and gaslighted by Susan Collins.
Yeah.
She's still in it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know much about local Maine politics, but I mean, Sara Gideon is leading in every poll, so I would definitely give it to her.
Right. So Susan Collins' claim to fame is that she's the swing vote, right? She voted for Obamacare. She voted for a lot of the Maine Democratic legislation that's gone through Congress has been because Susan Collins has sided with the Democrats on certain issues. And of course, she's not doing it because she has a moral compass, in my opinion. She's doing it because she wanted to survive and win the next election.
Right.
But down to impeachment, she talked one way and did the opposite. I know she's going to pay the price. Actually, I want to give you one more that we'll look at, and it's going to be Kentucky. Mitch McConnell. It's Mitch McConnell, and when Mitch McConnell comes out and says, "Hey, I'm for the $600 unemployment," that's because I think his polls are saying, "Hey, it's a poor state, and you might lose if you don't, if you do not do something for the poor people of Kentucky." And again, it's that dynamic you were talking about with the rural. So let's look at the Kentucky one again. I like to look at the strategy because it's reality, right? They pick a military woman who walks and talks like a Republican, then registers as a Democrat. But McConnell should win this under normal circumstances, but this is not. He should win by 30 points. And there she is, Amy McGrath, the woman. And she came out and said that, right? She said, McConnell's against health care for us, and I get free health care because I'm from the military. That isn't right. Everybody should get the same rights I have. And man, Mitch McConnell, for him, he's in trouble right now. He's only up 5 points. Now, it's killing him, right? Because he likes to stick his nose in other Senate races around the country so he can have a majority, right? And then the people that he helps owes him, like in a mafia sort of way. But man, he can't do that now. He better go down there and go fight with Amy McGrath over there because he only has a 5-point lead. What does that mean? That means Tom Steyer and Michael Bloomberg each, and that's going to be interesting to see. We'll bring it down to the financial disclosure. We'll see how much money Bloomberg and Steyer gave to the Amy McGrath campaign. I think at this point, reports show it's about $20 million. So
wow.
She's well funded.
Yeah.
Acting and walking like a Republican. And this is the thing she has. She did military service, and he got out of it like Trump. All right. So final thoughts. What are your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, this was a lot of great information. Yeah, I hope I didn't piss anyone off too much with my liberal snowflake views. But I think, yeah, it's important to read both sides and listen to both sides. But I just encourage everyone to vote with your conscience. And for me, there's only one way to go.
Right. And
yeah.
I haven't decided yet, but I am wanting to look at the information pragmatically, look and empathize. And that's something that has struck me, right? The lack of empathy people have. People kill their grandparents to win for the economy, or unless something happens to them, it doesn't happen to anybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
People are so inside their head, lack of empathy. So I want to show empathy, right? And maybe convert some toilet paper people who hoard things to look at both sides. And then people who do not have the time can listen to our information. And again, what we just say isn't gospel. We don't have a monopoly on the truth. We just want to bring information out to people that are not getting other places, so they get more involved, they get more educated, and we can help them make more sense of the world, right? Because we've been out there and we haven't lived in a bubble, so we can provide the information they need. Well, thank you so kindly, man, for providing all of this. We will be back.
Yeah, I'm excited to watch the RNC and come back with some thoughts, some hot takes.
There's going to be a lot because during this conversation, a lot of things kind of popped up that I had been thinking about. So it's going to be very exciting.
Yeah.
And I will end with Winston Churchill. You make a living from your labor, but you make a life from what you give. Thank you for listening to the ESBC Podcast Network.